On Monday and Thursday nights, the mail train arrived in Roma, often drawing a small crowd of keen spectators who gathered to examine the steam engines at close quarters and watch the arrival and departure of travellers. On this Thursday night, however, more people than usual crowded the platform, and a distinctly patriotic atmosphere prevailed. Australian flags and Union Jacks bedecked the station, and the town band played Rule Britannia and the national anthem, while a lone bugler warbled valiantly in the background. The first batch of many Roma boys who would ultimately leave for the war made their way down Wyndham Street, accompanied by a large crowd. Arriving at the train station, they added their number to the swelling throng of family, friends, and enthusiastic well-wishers gathered there. The appearance of the 6 volunteers as they strode along the station platform drew a resounding cheer and a long whistle from the waiting train. Frank's family gathered around him to make their farewells. One of 5 children to Henry and Catherine Holloway, Frank was the second eldest, with 2 brothers and 2 sisters. As they stood together on the station platform, the tears flowed and warm embraces lingered. Frank's father, Henry, was immensely proud that his son was the first to enlist in Roma, shaking his hand and embracing him warmly. That he and Harley were heading off together and would protect and support each other was of some comfort to Catherine, whose pride in her son, now departing for a war in a distant land, was muted by a far deeper anxiety. Frank's many cousins also came to see him off. As expected, Nug had not been accepted due to his poor eyesight. Although proud of his cousin, Nug was equally disappointed not to be going with him. He shook Frank's hand warmly and wished him good luck. "God bless you, mate," he told him quietly. After more handshaking, backslapping, and the inevitable good-natured ribbing from many of their friends, the 6 men finally boarded their allotted carriage. The cheering crowd followed the train, singing and waving flags. Auld Lang Syne, Onward Christian Soldiers, and Soldiers of the King accompanied the shrill whistle of the engine as it slowly pulled away and began the long journey east to Brisbane. By the middle of August, what would become a vast military camp had steadily materialised in Bell's Paddock, Enoggera, an outlying suburb to the north of Brisbane. The first members of the future 9th Infantry Battalion had arrived on By the middle of August, what would become a vast military camp had steadily materialised in Bell's Paddock, Enoggera, an outlying suburb to the north of Brisbane. The first members of the future 9th Infantry Battalion had arrived on 17 and 18 August, while Frank, Harley, and a number of other men had marched into the camp in the early hours of the 21st. One after the other, they were drafted into the battalion, both assigned to D Company. A day later, Roma boy Jack Deasley arrived and was also assigned to the burgeoning D Company. Deasley and Frank were already well acquainted due to their mutual interests in photography. Originally hailing from Toowoomba, Deasley, like Frank, had worked as a photographer for his father before moving to Roma. Over the following days, other men from the Roma district and the Darling Downs would filter in. Each company would ultimately consist of around 100 men, and there were 8 companies in all, A through to H. Once the quota was filled, the battalion would comprise over 30 officers and 1,000 other ranks. A regional identity was considered crucial in creating a sense of camaraderie, and as a result, most of the officers and men from the various militias were posted to the same companies. Many of the officers in the militia forces had seen service in the British Army. A second lieutenant was assigned to D Company soon after Frank, and proved to be no stranger to the young men from Roma. The Welsh-born John Power Roberts, a 32-year-old sanitary engineer, had come to Australia in 1911. He had settled in Ipswich and served in the 11th Infantry Regiment since 1912. Roberts was a professional soldier, having spent 12 years with the Durham Light Infantry in England, but he possessed a sparkle and a wit that set him apart. While not a tall man, at just 5 foot 4 inches, his appearance certainly marked him as the typical British officer, with his dark, slicked hair and thick black moustache, the ends waxed to a fine point. During the first few weeks in camp, new men continued to arrive, supplies were delivered and sorted, and equipment was distributed as it became available, with the officers arranging what training they could in between other activities. The camp now settled into some semblance of routine as squad and company drill commenced, followed by battalion drill. Marching, shooting, general instruction and other physical activities consumed the days, the men often working late into the evening. Despite his aching feet, Frank wrote to his father that he had become quite proficient at foot slogging. The light horsemen were somewhat more fortunate, and Frank's good-natured mates, Dick and Charlie McFarlane, reminded Frank of this on a regular basis. The brothers had joined one of Romer's favourite sons in Mick Shanahan in the 2nd Light Horse Regiment soon after Frank had left Roma. In mid-September he was surprised to see a well-known and much respected Methodist minister among the new arrivals in camp. Frank immediately recognised the diminutive figure of the Reverend James Graham Hunter as he shouldered his kit and began the search for his tent, eventually assigned to B Company. Originally hailing from Glasgow in Scotland, Hunter had spent time on the Methodist circuit around the Roma district, where he had become acquainted with the Franks family. He had initially attempted to enlist as a chaplain, but had been told that there was no positions available and had decided to join as a soldier instead. Much to his delight, Frank's Brisbane relatives came to visit him in camp each Sunday afternoon. His Aunt Mary had lived in Roma until she had married James Brooks in 1892 and moved to West End in Brisbane. Mary's 2 boys, Hilton and Ernie, eagerly accompanied her to Enoggera to visit Frank. While he had completed a year in the senior cadets, the mild-mannered Hilton had expressed no real interest in enlisting. His brother Ernie was too young, although this had not diminished his patriotic fervour. Ernie had asked his mother and father for permission, rather than attempting to enlist in secret prior to turning 18. Unsurprisingly, they had refused. As it was, the quota of men promised by the government had been filled, and the 1st Expeditionary Force was almost ready to be deployed. Initially, 3 infantry brigades were raised, consisting of 4 battalions each. The 1st Brigade comprised men drawn from New South Wales, while the 2nd Brigade was largely Victorian. The 3rd Brigade consisted of 4 battalions from the less populous states: the 9th, Queensland, the 10th, South Australia, 11th, Western Australia, and the 12th, Tasmania. Command of the 3rd Brigade was assigned to a Lieutenant Colonel Ewan Sinclair McLagan, a highly experienced British Army regular officer then on the staff of the fledgling Australian Army Officer Training Institution, the Royal Military College, Duntroon. Sinclair McLagan visited the 9th Battalion at Enoggera 5 weeks into its training, bringing the exciting news that within a week the men would be setting sail for war. When a smiling Lieutenant Roberts passed this news to the men in D Company, they gave a resounding cheer that was echoed throughout the camp. A few days later, at 4:15 a.m. on 24 September, the men of the 9th Battalion marched the short distance to the Enoggera railway station. The train journey terminated at Pinkenbar Wharf, and within hours all were aboard the transport ship HMAT A5 Omra. This was Frank's first experience of the ocean. In fact, it marked his first time aboard a ship. His Roma light horse pals were also departing, preparing to board the A15, Star of England, berthed nearby. At midday, with soldiers lining her decks, many of whom were seeing Brisbane for the last time, Omra pulled away from Pinkenbar Wharf and headed down the river, past Fort Lytton and out to sea. With Harley beside him, Frank was on his way to the great adventure, the first of the family to leave for the war. He smiled at the thought of what lay ahead and the tales he would tell on his return. Thank you once again for joining with me and I know that this is going to take a while, but I am really looking forward to sharing this with you. And one thing I might add is that if you've bought the book, just be aware there's going to be spoilers. And as you can tell so far by the way I've written the book, it's written in a way that you're not going to know what's coming. So hopefully you'll enjoy that style. So thanks again for joining with me, and I'll see you for chapter 2.